This week, in the security news, we talk about how a hacker took over a smart home with vulgar music and rising temperatures. Sounds like a scene from a TV show. A security warning for 23 million YouTube creators following a crazy hack attack. Is that a hack attack? It's either a hack or... Anyway, Vimeo is sued for storing face prints of people without their permission. Selfie Android apps push ads and can record audio, and how adopting DevOps leads to an improved security posture, or does it? In our second segment, we're airing 3 pre-recorded interviews from the SE Village at DEFCON with Billy Boatwright, Edward Miro, and Jason Street. In our final segment, 2 more pre-recorded interviews from SE Village with Perry Carpenter and Chris Edwards. All that and more on this episode of Paul's Security Weekly.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where exploits run wild, packets aren't the only things getting sniffed, and the cocktails flow steady. It's Paul's Security Weekly. Effectively securing your organization and its reputation requires a smarter approach. To maximize efficiency and minimize risk, security experts turn to Logarithm, the only leading solution built solely for security teams by a security team committed to your success. With next-gen SIEM, user and entity behavior analytics, network traffic and behavior analysis, security automation and orchestration, and compliance, Logarithm provides security made smarter. Is your IT team ready to face the next implementation or upgrade? Do you have a pool of talented team members who are trained and ready to support your organization's growth? The right IT skills development platform can get you past the IT skills gap. With training content that's so engaging, some even call it binge-worthy learning, your team will watch and learn more with IT Pro TV. Get a free team trial of IT Pro TV today. Visit securityweekly.com/IT Pro TV. Are you an enterprise dissatisfied with overpriced analytics software that can't keep up with modern data? If so, then GravWell is the solution for you. GravWell is an unstructured data analytics platform for enterprises who demand total data visibility across their network. GravWell lets your security team go beyond the SIEM and fuse data sources to correlate and answer questions you didn't know needed to be asked. Go to gravwell.io/securityweekly for an unlimited data trial and gain uncompromising visibility today.
And welcome to the show. But first, an introduction is in order. He's a man who likes his martinis, his smart homes, and his porn, both hot and dirty. Mr. Paul Asadorian.
Welcome, everyone, to Paul's Security Weekly. It's episode 621, recorded on September 26th, 2019, right here in G-Unit Studios in lovely Rhode Island. With me here today in studio, Security Weekly CEO Matt Alderman. Matt, welcome.
Thank you. And the hot and dirty joke comes from me for the martinis. So you're welcome.
They're delicious.
And the smart homes from one of the stories tonight. And, well, I just know Paul enough about the porn. So
Yeah, you know me well enough. Sometimes too well. But, we'll save that for after the show. Larry Pesce is here in studio. Larry, welcome.
Thank you. This shirt happened to be right on the top of the pile today, so it was the appropriate shirt.
It's awesome. It's awesome.
So to that,
we also drink because Jeff says PCI.
And Jeff is on the lines remotely. Welcome, Mr. Jeff Mann. How are you, Jeff?
I'm having a hard time adjusting to these early news segments. I got to just drink early and fast.
Drink earlier, yes.
Right.
Your scotch and or bourbon and or whiskey was blurry. Is that...
Let me try to make it clearer.
There you go.
I think you got to pull it close. Oh,
there you go.
It only
There you
lives
go.
in out-of-focus areas.
What is that, Jeff? Is that bourbon, scotch, whiskey?
Rye.
Rye whiskey.
Yeah, he's a rye guy.
Very
Rye
nice.
whiskey.
Rye guy.
Very nice. Lee Neely, he's got something in his mystery cup. Mr. Lee Neely's on the lines remotely. Welcome, Lee.
Good to be here from Livermore because I'm at work. It's a legal substance, so that's no alcohol involved, but I will struggle through somehow.
So what you're saying, that's filled with bourbon.
It's
in your
Irish
glass.
coffee.
It's Irish coffee.
vodka.
Mexican coffee.
Vodka.
Yeah.
Vodka, it's clear liquid.
And Mr. Tyler is here with a special guest appearance. Tyler Robinson, welcome. Representing your company there, Nisos. Very nice. Very nice.
As always.
And
Front and center.
beverage?
Coffee today.
Tyler, have you been on our shows before? Maybe as kind of like a guest, kind of
Yes.
I feel like you've definitely
I've
have
been
not.
on a couple of times guests. Let's see, we did the 500 episode. I think we've done the technical segment.
Yep, he's been here in the
or two.
studio a couple times. and
Gotcha.
Been on the show.
Well, so give our audience a little background on what you're up to today, Tyler, because you have not been a official guest co-host on the show in the past.
Yeah, let's see. Currently running operations as a director over at Nisos, doing a lot of red team, a lot of cool research and design.
Which makes me sad, by the way.
Yeah, unfortunately, Larry and I have
No longer work together.
now work together in a different capacity, so it
Yes.
works great.
Well,
So
it's,
yeah, definitely doing a lot of cool stuff, working with very, very large companies, trying to solve some really big problems within security, from the offensive aspect for me, obviously.
and it looks like you're broadcasting from a church. Is that? I
The
get
Church
that.
of Tea today. I flew in late last night from Boston, and so yeah, we're in the Church of Tea and not in my office, so hanging out at home today.
Excellent. Let's see. Quick announcement. EC Council, listen up, is offering our listeners now a free pass. That's right, free, as in free beer, to attend the 2-day conference. Use the discount code HH19SW when you register to get your free ticket to Hacker Halted, or go to securityweekly.com/Hacker Halted. Jeff and I will be both speaking there. I'm super excited for that. I've got some little tweaks to make to my talk there, which I gave yesterday at the Compass Cybersecurity Symposium here in Rhode Island.
We're also going to do some sponsored interviews,
Sponsored
and some other
interviews?
community interviews, and grab some more content while we're down there.
It's going to be a lot of fun.
And smoke cigars.
And smoke cigars.
And
Yes.
drink
And drink
rye
cocktails.
and bourbon and vodka and
It's
whatever else
the
has
typical Security
alcohol in it.
Weekly
party.
conference appearance. Right.
Of course.
So we need your help in a survey we're running for research purposes. How mature is your process automation for your various security capabilities? This is just a mouthful. SecurityWeekly.com/5 stages of automation security, and submit your responses to our 5 stages of automation maturity survey.
You know it would get a lot easier if we could just get the new website out and people go survey, click.
Right. Or, if we had an easy, like SecurityWeekly.com/unicorns might be easier.
Ooh, unicorns.
Unicorns, right?
Ooh, nice.
So let's see. We're talking about news stories. Gentlemen, start your engines.
Oh my gosh! So
We've
there's
got a lot.
All right, so there's probably like a half a dozen stories in here about CrowdStrike that we should probably avoid.
So Matt is correct. Matt is correct. However,
Wow.
our good friend of the show, friend of mine, Mr. Robert Graham from Errata Security, I thought had the best article on the subject. And I haven't
Yes.
kind of delved into all the politics behind this, but apparently President Trump mentioned CrowdStrike in the Ukraine
transcript.
in context on a conversation that was obviously recorded. Robert has the transcript on his website, and then kind of just delves into the facts, which is
Yeah.
what I like about. How hard is that to find today? Someone that reports on something that has to do with President Trump, and is not delving into politics and actually talking about facts.
It was so this goes back to the DNC hack, and CrowdStrike did some research to identify where the hack came from.
Yep.
And there was a lot of data where
Now, did he research all the investigation?
they did part of the investigation. I don't know if they did all of it, but there was an investigation component from CrowdStrike looking at where the attack came from.
They investigated. It involved research. How's that?
Oh, that's even better, Jeff. And there was a link to Russia and potentially Ukraine. And so what the president did in his conversation that's created all this uppity-up in the news, and we'll stay away from that for a second, was asking if the server or the data from the server was actually in Ukraine, because everybody's trying to figure out what actually happened. And so CrowdStrike got pulled into that because CrowdStrike did some of the initial investigation work. And attributed this to Russia and potentially Ukraine and Russia as part of this attack. So that's
And my also understanding to the ties to that CrowdStrike got involved was that they had identified some ties to the Ukraine, and it was demanded by President Trump that why are we having third parties do this analysis? Why hasn't the FBI done it? And their CrowdStrike's answer was, we turned over everything we had to the FBI. Like, we worked with them to make this happen.
Right.
Which is, I mean, that's difficult to do in terms of when you do that kind of stuff, maintaining a chain of custody of evidence if there's going to be some kind of legal or prosecution.
Right.
I don't know that that's one thing we talked about with Chris Hadnagy, but I was talking with him yesterday because he was at the same event, and we're talking about assisting law enforcement.
Yeah.
And so many of us are more than willing to assist law enforcement. But one of the things that, that we were talking about was, I'm like, hold on, wait. You have to maintain someone asked him another question. I was like, you have to maintain a chain of evidence and custody, and it's all like a thing about it. So in Chris's case, having an organization around it, I think really helps him. In CrowdStrike's case, having a formal company behind doing that, I think you're in a better position than if it's just a Paul or Larry or Matt going, hey, like I found this stuff on the internet. It might help your investigation. Right. I don't think helps, probably not at all in most cases. So.
Yes. So it's all over the news because it's a cybersecurity company that we track. It had a great IPO, but it got pulled into all this other news about the Ukraine transcript and all this other stuff.
Which is unfortunate.
Yes.
So
we'll leave it at that. Because
I strongly encourage our listeners to read Robert Graham's post on blog.erratasec.com. I thought it was the best one.
I think Wired has a decent take on it as well, which is the article that I put up.
Sure.
Like I said, there were no less than a half a dozen articles on this topic in there. So
it showed up.
I figured we should cover it and then move on.
Where do we want to go from there? What happened to Tyler, too, by the way?
I don't know. He's
not there
lost
anymore.
internet connectivity or something. Google wins landmark case. Right to be forgotten only applies in EU.
That's interesting.
I thought this was a very interesting case, right? Because is we've been going out in expanding our network into the EU, into Asia, and to others, to audiences, because about 20% of our audience listens from Europe.
Mm-hmm.
There's been all these questions about a right to be forgotten and GDPR and all these other things, right? And so this case goes back years. I think 14 or 15 was the original start of aspects of this case, where there was this a lawsuit against Google about right to be forgotten, and the courts ruled, that only really applies to the EU. It's something that doesn't have to be done globally.
Mm-hmm.
It was just an interesting case. I don't think the search engines are out of the woods on this one. I don't think others are outside of the woods when it comes to GDPR.
They're storing a lot more data about people. And I think for us, whether we are forced to be compliant with that or not, it's a nice thing to implement. Because for us, in a lot of smaller companies, it's on a small scale. And it's a nice thing to have as a feature for the user. Like, look, in a lot of cases, if you want us to forget about you, just click on subscribe from our mailing list, and we've forgotten about you, right? Now, we may have to go back into our archives and look at the data that we store and make sure that any copies of that are removed, but that's pretty easy, too,
and
right?
we've had to do that in a couple cases.
Absolutely.
I mean, I've had a couple instances where people are like, look, don't bug me anymore. I don't want to be in your mailing list. Fine. We've removed them and gone through our systems to make sure they're all completely extracted out. Because I don't want us as a small business to get caught into that web, right?
Right. But I also like it as a service to the user, too. Like, we'll honor your your request.
Yeah.
Totally.
You don't want to be part of the mailing list? Done. Good. We'll delete out. And so it's just a process that we kind of go through internally. But when you think about Google, and you think about a search engine that everybody's using to go find for stuff.
Servers and services and data stores. And
it's crazy.
And who they've shared it with. It's
crazy, all the links. And like you said, the sharing with the advertising and affiliates and all this stuff move in real time. I mean, how can you put the genie back in the bottle?
Right. Yep. It's a good analogy.
Mm-hmm. Very difficult. So this
he asks for 3 wishes, and then he goes away, doesn't he?
Well, because then somebody else has to do it. Yeah. So I think the lesson here is, the scope of GDPR and the right to be forgotten is limited to EU and EU people, and you're not going to get some global features. I still think there's going to be a lot of case law and a lot of lawsuits coming out of GDPR over time that are going to continue to define what's in and out of scope for that regulation. It's still very nebulous to a lot of people. We've seen some big fines levied for European companies that have breached data, like British Airways and some others.
Brian Lamoureux, we spoke with on Business Security Weekly this week and gave a presentation yesterday as well. I would look at him as definitely an expert, if not one of the most foremost experts in this particular topic as regulation pertains to big tech. His experience and background is astonishing in this area. He worked for some of the legal firms that were involved with big tobacco, which a lot of regulation there, obviously. Actually, recent legislation here in Rhode Island, and a dotted line to that with the whole vaping thing in Massachusetts and Rhode Island have passed legislation about that. And GDPR, I think, was instrumental in some of the first legislation. Now, spoil something from Brian's talk, but he credits this to a documentary I think that he watched, was that there was legislation in the U.S. pretty much the same thing as GDPR. And guess what happened? That legislation was thrown out the window.
Lobbyists.
September 11th.
Oh.
And very quickly, the Patriot Act,
Threw it away.
was passed. And so I think that, and Brian, in crediting the documentary, attributes that to the rise and success of large companies, Apple, Google, Facebook, and all these large, Amazon, right? Because they didn't have any regulations to keep them in check. Now, I'm on the regulation. I take it on a case-by-case basis today. I think some people kind of fall on either side whether regulation is good or bad. I look at it, and it was definitely Cory, what's his name that writes science fiction books? Cory Doctorow put me in check on that and said, look, Paul, like regulation can be really good. He's like, agreed, can be really bad, but it's on a case-by-case basis, right? Yeah. And I think that legislation such as GDPR and movements in the U.S., provided, again, case-by-case, if it's done right, could help to keep these companies in check. Because now, today in the U.S., I mean, we've experienced it. A lot of other people here and who are listening have experienced as well. In a lot of cases, these big tech companies, since they're not regulated, pretty much it's up to them what happens.
They do whatever they want.
You want to sell stuff in their store? Up to them. Arbitrary. You want to put content on their site? They determine whether it stays there or not. You know where I'm going with this. You want to use their API.
YouTube.
You want to use their API because there's something that's grinding my gears today. You want to use their API. They get to set the rules. And not only that, they either get to decide whether the rules exist or not, and whether or not
they can change them.
Or they can change them without your. They can say, "Hey, you know what? Guess what, YouTube? You're going to use our API. You've got 1 million points as your default quota, and that's great until such time other events happen, and they're like, yeah, no, you've got 500,000, and then you've got 20,000, and then you've got 10,000, and oh, by the way, you want more? There is a completely undocumented and undefined process for which you don't get a ticket number that you can apply for more, but it feels like completely arbitrary, like whether or not I'm even going to be successful in this process of getting more quota, because I'm still trying to understand the rules, and every communication is, oh, you have 3 business days to respond, as an example of how big tech, how much control they have over how you use their services and if you can use their services or not, which is a huge problem for me.
Yeah,
and a lot of people. Go ahead, Jeff.
Go, Jeff.
So I'm actually trying to skim through the article because the question I had that I was seeing if I could get the answer from the article is, so what does this mean? And I guess the question that I was really trying to answer is if it only applies in the EU, does that mean it only applies to citizens of the EU? It seems like the article is saying it only applies to Google search engines that are operated within the EU, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me if I'm in the United States, but I was in Canada last week, and there was a lot of websites that I couldn't get to because I was outside of the U.S. So I'm not familiar with what it's like to be in the EU and Googling, because presumably they use a different type of search engine, and there's something in play in terms of boundaries and limitations and things like that. So the basic question I ask is, what does this mean?
Well,
Feel
first
free,
of all,
anyone to jump in.
First of all, you were overseas.
In
'cause
Canada.
You're in Canada.
That's right. I was overseas in Canada. Absolutely.
Number two is when you go into another country and you go to google.com, it may redirect you to google.fr for France or google.uk for Europe. And I think what this regulation's saying is that, yeah, if you're using one of those extensions, then the ability to be forgotten's there. But because google.com is more of a global domain, it doesn't apply to the google.com broader search engine. And so I'm not quite sure how this plays out, to be honest, Jeff, because, you know, if I go to google.com and it redirects me to google.fr, for example, what's the difference for me as a user? Maybe I can't search as much, or I'm searching local domains, but I went to google.com and it redirected me. Does that mean my right to be forgotten is only there or part of the global site? I think this is what the regulation, this is what the ruling was saying, is like, it doesn't apply to all of Google, but maybe if you're in France, you go to google.fr, and in that particular case, in that subset, there has to be the ability to be right to be forgotten, but it doesn't apply to Google as a whole. And that's where things, I think, get really, really interesting. That's why the article says, look, I don't think search engines are out of the woods on this. And I think a lot of it depends on where you start, where you get redirected, and how search results come up. But again, this is crazy because
Well, I think the other part of my question, what I'm curious about is, what does this mean in terms of precedents for other companies that might be subject to following the right to be forgotten, or RTBF as they call it in the article? Companies that are, perhaps U.S. based or otherwise, but they're operating internationally. Because a quick plug for someone that I've met this year, a woman named Amber Welch, who's given, she actually keynoted Circle CityCon this year, and she was giving a talk on sort of this very topic and how to hack the right to be forgotten by going to companies and basically flooding them with requests to do the queries and the lookups, and do you have any of my personal data? And the way that things are set up these days, there's a certain dollar amount that it costs to process these things, and the way the rules are written, you have to respond to them. You can't just ignore them, even if you're clearly seeing that somebody's basically DOSing you with a whole bunch of requests for, information that clearly isn't anybody that's legitimately trying to get the information. So So a quick plug for Amber, if you're listening. She's actually speaking at Hacker Halted, Paul. So
Sweet.
Hopefully we can maybe get her a quick interview, or at least go hear her talk. But I'm actually interested to see what she says about this case law determination, and sort of the larger, what does this mean in terms of precedents for other companies? Because yes, it helps maybe Google, but does it help anybody else?
Probably. I mean, think of Salesforce.com. Think of some of these other large SaaS platforms that are based in the U.S. that might also have local domains in other countries because they're global. Potentially helps them as well from this ruling. So it'll be interesting to see how this plays out, Jeff.
Well, how much? I don't know the answer to this. That's why I'm asking the question. How much does Google separate their search engine? I mean, if they have a different domain for whatever country or region they're in, are they completely separate, or do they all tie together on the back end in terms of the big data that they're collecting?
You may never know.
So one of the there was an interesting comment in one of the articles I found on this, because this is also my number 4, is that the GDPR right to be forgotten only applies to results appearing in its searches within the 28-country EU bloc. I mean, that comes back to Mac's comment about Google.fr versus Google.ca or .com. So I guess they're only saying those services that are mapped to one of the 28 EU members is where we have to do the right to forgotten, or where they have to do the right to forgotten. And if you can compartmentalize like that, okay. It still feels like a slippery slope.
Yes.
Are we ready to move on?
Which is why case law will eventually set precedents for the future
That's the way it
of
always
these
works.
regulations. Yes.
Always the way it always works.
Where'd you want to go from here? I don't know that I have a smooth transition.
More martinis. That's
yeah,
where I want
after
to go.
that, more martinis. But
I have some over there. That means I have to get up.
Or one of the gentlemen from the
DevOps
ladies from the
or
back room.
life after a breach for a CISO or...
Well, you and I both had the DevOps story up, but...
Well, then do it.
All right. Does DevOps lead to improved security, or does it open up more security exposures? And at what point do we come together on those issues?
And is there any right answer? More importantly,
I think it's a difficult thing to... I think right now it's a difficult thing to measure. There was another story that kind of hinted towards like what's your cloud security.
Well,
and Matt and I have done some segments about your cloud security.
We've talked a lot about cloud security and DevOps and integration of security. This has
I
been
think
a topic
there's
of mine for
too many
3+
unknowns
years.
to know how much of a additional risk or less of a risk it is if you're using DevOps or if you're adopting cloud services, because largely it's untested waters for a lot of areas.
To give you an idea of how untested this is, 22% of firms at the highest level of security integration having reached an advanced stage of DevSecOps maturity compared to only 6% of firms with no security integration, right?
But
Those are small numbers.
But what is advanced?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's...
And how do you measure that? And presenter yesterday was talking about how when they poll their audience or their customers or whoever, thank you, that a small percentage will raise their hand and say, yes, we've implemented a full DevOps CI/CD pipeline. We're deploying all of our services into the cloud. And just that in of itself, security aside, in 3 to 5% roughly, right? And then someone stands up and says, and those 3 to 5% are lying, right? And how do you really know?
Right.
And what does it really mean? And so I think this whole notion that DevOps practices are in fact leading to improved security really just requires more research, because we haven't even developed the methods for which to measure.
Yeah.
Like you can say, yes, we're more secure. Okay, but how did you measure your security? Is it because you haven't had security incidents? Well, does that just mean that...
Bless you.
Bless you. You all right there, Jeff?
Sorry, little allergy.
Little allergy to bullshit there.
But the other thing is so in this was like 3,000 respondents, right? Which is a pretty good sample size, by the way. Additionally, the report found that Europe is pulling ahead of the U.S. and the Asia-Pacific region when it comes to firms with an overall significant to full integration status. Now, over the U.S., I agree. If you break down APJ by country, I'm not quite sure, because I think Australia is actually doing a fantastic job at this. So I don't. You've got to look under the covers to say, well, APJ as a whole, because APJ is really big. But if you look at Australia, who's been really advanced when it comes to DevOps processes, integration of containers, cloud adoption, I mean, they're as a single country are probably doing more than any other country around the world.
See, but
and you look at these numbers and you're like, well, Europe, really? I mean, I haven't seen that.
I think all that is largely bullshit, because when we push into a DevOps world, we may get the notion that, hey, we're seeing less security incidents. That's because you don't have visibility into seeing them anymore, right? That could be one thing.
That could be one of it. Yeah.
So I'm just...
It all depends how you measure it.
This is true.
Right.
Yeah, and what I'm not
what you're looking
seeing
for.
in the U.S., outside of a few very specific examples, tight integration of security into the DevOps process. And to me, because they don't have that, they don't know half the stuff that's going on until the breach actually happens. And we've
that's
seen those
funny,
breaches
'cause
all over the place.
I haven't seen in my somewhat limited experience, I haven't seen security at all baked into DevOps. Too often, in my experience.
Yeah, admittedly, in your experience. Fair enough.
I mean,
Inherently, it gives us the capability to push out security fixes more quickly, theoretically.
Right.
Theoretically, it does. If you've got the different tools integrated in at the different levels of the CI/CD pipeline.
What it doesn't
I've got a great presentation on this, and
Right.
there's a really good segment on ESW about aspects of this,
what
too.
it doesn't change is the amount of developer time it takes to fix security bugs. Maybe over time, right, as you're fixing things more quickly and in more smaller chunks, that when there is a security vulnerability, it's not as much work because you've been doing updates and making changes over time to make your software better. One could argue that. But the thing that, like, if you're didn't do this one thing and you find a vulnerability, the fact that you can push it out faster doesn't change how long it's going to take you to code in that fix, especially if it's an architectural
Right. If it's Python 2.7 to 3.0, right?
Yeah, there's like a million examples, right?
Right.
Yeah.
But we all know that you got to be on the latest binaries in your DevOps process.
Yep.
And sometimes that's an architectural shift, and there's a lot of regression that has to happen to make those jumps and those leaps into version changes. Does DevOps potentially help you with that? Yes. If you've got a really good integration process and really good regression QA test set up, yeah, it's a lot easier.
So you could, so I guess I'm mistaken. I think it does help you make security bug fixes in a more timely manner, because when I go in and make a change to the code base, now my regression testing, as you mentioned specifically, it runs automatically. So that does mean I can make changes more quickly. So in that sense, you're correct.
There are advantages, but it's only if you have all the other pieces integrated in. Yes.
Yeah.
Jeff,
And you still
hold on, Jeff, then Lee.
Oh, no, Lee can go first.
Okay, Lee, then Jeff.
All right. So I'm still thinking about the articles we see about developers in a hurry checking in their passwords and private keys into the repository that then gets deployed.
We'll talk about that story next, and I'll put some context behind that because I've lived it in all five of those cases.
I can hold at that point, because I'm just thinking, what I was going to say is you got to have, whether you're doing DevSecOps or not, there has to be rigor behind development, regardless of your methodology.
Agreed.
It's got to be in there.
And you've got to integrate it into the various stages of your integration deployment pipeline so that you're not storing credentials in a place that's bad.
But okay, so on that point specifically, and I was going to give some more examples and more meat to my bold, gross statement. But you're saying you have to. I see. No, you don't have to. Nobody's monitoring that. Nobody's holding any developer's feet to the fire to do that. Too often it's not happening. So to give a couple examples of what I mean by I'm not seeing it, and I have to cite PCI. So PCI requires
take a drink. Drink.
We're all drinking. Hold on. We need a drink. Okay. Good.
PCI requires for application developers, QSAs are supposed to interview a sample of, some of the application developers, try to get a feel for, are they knowledgeable about common, coding gotchas. OWASP top 10 is an emphasis. There's also supposed to be something called a software development life cycle. Now, many of us on this episode used to work for a software company, and for my entire tenure, when I asked to see a copy of the software development lifecycle, nobody could produce one. Not saying it didn't exist. I don't think it existed.
It still doesn't exist, by the way. Just FYI.
I'm willing to concede that in the modern world, with the different way of doing code development with DevOps and whatever, that the concept of an SDLC maybe has gone away. But it bugs me that, in the design phase, think about security. In the development phase, think about security. In the testing phase, think about security. In the implementation phase, think about security, which is something that's supposed to be baked into an SDLC. I don't see that. Not only do I not see that being, existing in customers that I have that I consult and advise, I don't see it being required, thought about. I've asked many people that claim to be doing DevOps or DevSecOps or SecDevOps, and I wish Hoodie was on that could school us on what the differences are. But I don't see people having any concept of security at all. I think they act very often on the assumption that the building blocks that they're using are secure, the architecture, the platform, it's somebody else has got it, somebody else is taking care of it. Their job is to write the code and make it work. I'm happy to be proven wrong. That's what I see.
No, I agree with you 100%, Jeff. This is why every time I go out and talk about this topic is people have to understand that security is not at the end of the pipeline. It's not at the end of the process. It's not at the end right before a release. It has to be moved back as concept to shift left. You can use whatever term you want. And so you're right. Dev doesn't care. Dev doesn't have to care. Development's job is to meet a set of business requirements, get them coded, and get that release out. It is security's responsibility to step in and say, look, let me understand what you guys are doing. Let me integrate some tools into the process so that we can validate steps along the CI/CD pipeline so that when the code is ready to be released, you don't have to listen to me say, wait a minute, I need a couple weeks. I got to go out and pen test this thing to make sure it's secure and then allow you to release or not.
So I think security needs a voice in this process at all times.
Agreed.
And I'll give you an example of why. I made a really, really poor coding mistake the other day. And it stems from a coding...
And I'm going to say right now, Mike Poor takes offense that you take his name in vain.
Yes.
You made a really erroneous programming mistake.
I made an erroneous... I made a mistake. And so here's
you violated the Security Weekly SDLC, no doubt.
Probably. But so here's what happened. I ran into a situation where I couldn't log into my own application. I forget the exact issue, whether it was code-related, database-related, config-related, but something led to the fact, and there is this mysterious bug in the application that we're developing where, like, sometimes no user accounts are valid. So with the hacker, so then, like, I take my developer hat off and I put my hacker hat on, and I'm like, hold on, wait a minute. I can't come at this from a developer perspective. I got to come at this from a hacker perspective. I'm like, okay, what do I have? I have access to the source code. That means I can do things that will get me in. So I'm like, where in the source code does it validate the user's password?
Just return true all the time.
Exactly what I did, Larry. It was like, if your password hash, right, matches the one in the database, then return true, else return false. I was like, well, if true, exactly what Larry said, because Larry has his hacker hat on. Look, I have access to the source code.
If user equals true and user equals true, then
somewhere
let you in.
But somewhere in the cycle, I may have flipped it back then, but then I may have to flip it the other way, right? And then, so like a week or two goes by, and I'm in the source code, and I'm like, wait a minute. If true, I'm like, I didn't put that back.
You didn't put it back.
I'm like, so for a whole week, it didn't matter what your username or password was.
It was always true.
It was always true. And I'm like, wow, I really need to write a test to be able to check for that. And I
trust, since we're talking about it, that you've fixed it.
I have fixed it. Yes, I have.
And that's the traditional
like
thing
on Monday
we're supposed to do on the pen test side is, great, yeah, your authentication works, but what happens when you put in garbage authentication? Does it let you in? Does it always answer true?
Right. So my point is, and that's somewhat
CI/CD doesn't always work.
It doesn't. It works as well.
It worked exactly as planned.
It worked,
except for
here's the thing.
That should only be in test and development. It should never be in production.
What Matt was saying before, that developers are responsible for making the application functional. This is a good example of a coding mistake. The application was even more functional. Users did not have any trouble logging in whatsoever. Yeah. So on that front, it was cool. But on the security side, if a test for a condition does not exist, therefore the release pushes out. And you can have the best DevOps CI/CD pipeline in the world, but if you don't have a test for various conditions, I think security is always going to be there to help apply those conditions. As technology and software changes.
It's available. It's not always required or involved, because there's this impression that either somebody else has got it covered. I don't have to worry about. It's taken care of somewhere else. It's taken care of by somebody else. To use a network analogy, and any rule fixes most network problems.
Yep.
And what's
Which was
interesting-
always the last rule in your firewall table for a long time.
You know how I caught the bug?
Yep.
It was actually my linting tool that said like this variable is never referenced because if true it would always be true. So the next code block, the else, was never executing, and my linting tool was like, you're never referencing this variable or this. There's something in the linting that led me to that. And I was like, oh. So I mean, for that reason, I really like inside the IDE that source code analysis, static analysis inside source code analysis inside.
And that's
your
why I
IDE.
always talk about security needing to work with the DevOps teams to understand what they're doing, and then how to take some of the tools that have always been done after the fact and bring them back and integrate them into steps in the process to say, oh, we caught that bug. Oh, we saw this. What's going on, development team? Oh, yeah, and they fix it. The sooner you catch it, the better it is for the overall stability and security of the application. But that means we as security professionals have to have the conversations with the development teams to figure out how to integrate all these tools we've bought that we use at the end, but no, use them earlier in the process.
And I truly believe we need an expansion of our tests. I think it's great to have things like the OWASP top 10 and all interview developers like PCI is saying about cross-site scripting and SQL injection, but we need to make sure that our tests are exhaustive for a lot of different scenarios, and not all of them may apply today, but as technology and code changes, they could be applicable. So now, okay, I found that one bug and I have a test for that, but now I'm like, what else could people screw up in this whole login process that I want a more exhaustive set of tests to run every time I check in code?
Your examples is a great test case. I was going to ask, and this is not meant to be a pop quiz on anybody's knowledge of the current OWASP top 10, but would the OWASP top 10 tests against the current OWASP top 10, would that have discovered what's essentially what I'm hearing, a logic error in your code?
Yeah,
I'm
it would be an
100%.
input. I think under input validation, there might be a
Yeah,
but
but
it's
it's
not.
not.
Authentication
but-
bypass.
It would be authentication bypass, if anything. I'm not sure if it handled, Jeff, my specific use case where the application just accepts anything.
anything.
When we as
that-
security
that-
people even think of authentication, we're like, make sure there's no default password, make sure there's no easily guessable password, make sure there's no backdoor.
These guys
right?
comment here.
But missing or not validating the authentication is part of it, right?
Yep. The
But as Larry
well,
said, I mean, it was an old technique, and hopefully it's not a good technique to use anymore. But you still have to try it.
Right.
The null password.
Yes.
Put in garbage and does it work?
Yeah,
That
so
should be standard test.
Lee.
Yeah, so the one of the OWASP top 10, I was just trying to find out which one it was while we were going on. Yeah, it's number 2, broken authentication. I think that covers it there, Paul.
Yeah, but how it's broken? Because I could have.
Right,
I
yeah.
think
Oh,
the form
Right.
in and of it. So here's an example of like missing password. Right, the form before it even gets to my backend code says no. You got to enter a password. So I catch that in the HTML or JavaScript in the form. It was if you had a value.
Right.
In that is that process valid? And again, that's just one example. So there's lots of different ways developers can introduce vulnerabilities.
Right.
And I think the security, to go back to our conversation of DevOps, is your security improving? It's only improving as the quality of your tests are improving. And I still think we've got a lot of work to do to make sure that the tests you implement are testing for all of these use cases above and beyond what might be standards or guidelines even. And a lot of that could be specific to your application. Also along the lines of developing in code, White Source published a good article on the top 5 things that you can make security-wise, security mistakes in Git. And just to put some color and context around those, hard coding sensitive data. And even though this is a problem, but even though Git might check for certain keys to be in your code, that doesn't mean you can't still hard code something into your application that Git is missing. And this fixing the problem can oftentimes lead to architectural issues that take a long time to fix, therefore making it a serious issue. The other one was ignoring your .git ignore. In other words, don't check these files in when I make a Git check-in. And I'm not sure if they go in the details here, but oftentimes what happens is one of the first things you do is set up a new project, and it creates your .git ignore file, but then you forget to update it. So you implement some other piece of functionality, and you do a check-in, and you forgot to update your git ignore so that a secrets file or some other piece of information gets checked in. So it's not just ignoring it, but always remembering to update it as a regular process that I think is the problem. Unsigned commits are very interesting. I think you should make people sign their commits. However, I think a lot of the mistakes that are introduced in code via commits come from people that already have signed access to your Git repository. I can vouch for that 100%. When I screw something up, I could sign all my commits all I want, but I still was able to commit that, that authentication bypass vulnerability in. So while that does help for third parties maybe trying to make commits, a lot of the security vulnerabilities I think are made by developers who already have access and are signing their commits. Of course, leaving the front door open, your own credentials as a developer, and not patching is a big one. Again, Git actually has checks, and in fact, we just implemented a Python library update that wiped out a bunch of alerts that were being generated by Git. They were saying, look, the library that you're including in your code that's ultimately in your container that's being deployed has vulnerabilities.
Yep.
Now, the analysis that I did, I prioritized that with our master schedule for software development. I'm like, nothing's like on fire right now. We may not be using some of the functionality in that library that's vulnerable, so I rated the risk accordingly. This is also where I think security and development can work together.
Yep.
So you need that security person there with development to help make that decision that the impact is XYZ. It's not the earth, the something's on fire. It's, in the next 3 months, let's make sure that we update all the libraries.
The challenge with containers, for example, is when you pull down a library like PHP, it's got shadow, curl, and a bunch of other binaries in it, which have a ton of vulnerabilities. But you may not be using shadow or curl or other things in your code, right? And the challenge is stripping those out is not necessarily easy sometimes.
And in the Python example, I might be pulling down requests was one of the libraries that had a vulnerability. Requests has a ton of modules and classes within it. I may be only using a request.get, right? Well, that didn't have the vulnerability, so maybe I'm not using that. But Git is flagging that you're importing all of requests, so you could have that. Now, the fix is really nice because, and this is where DevOps saves you time. I can say, look, build my new container with all the latest versions of the library, fix all the problems, run through all of my tests, and if it passes, pushes it out. That's a huge advantage. Jeff.
Before we do that.
Hold on, Jeff, then Larry. Jeff's been raising his hand for a while, Larry.
Well, PCI.
Well, it's not really PCI. Just based on what you just said, I think the prevailing attitude, especially when we start talking about containers, is patching almost goes away. You just you blow things up and you just keep reloading the current and the latest, which technically I think is patching, but it's not
I agree.
patched the way we consider it. But the classic argument that developers and administrators have made for as long as we've been in this business is the concern that installing a patch or updating to the latest version breaks the critical application that's running the business. How is that addressed or addressed is the best word I can come up with in the container world, using the concept of we just blow things up and just keep loading the current.
That's where regression testing and your QA tests have to come in, Jeff. If you've got the right QA tests in place to regression test functionality, then you know that when you upgrade from version 2.7 to 3.0 in Python, we'll know whether functionality got regressed because the QA test will fail.
We'll know what failed and what didn't, right? So we have we have better visibility into what we have to fix to make a more informed decision, maybe about how much time it will take to fix it. We can implement fixes, run through that regression test, even as a separate process, right? We can have a whole feature branch this is the application on the whole new version, and we just continue to iterate, and maybe we put a separate team to continue to iterate to get us to the latest version. Then we merge those features back into the main line. The other half of the development team is implementing features and fixing bugs, while another portion of the team is working on the next upgrade. At some point, they merge together, which sounds easy, but it's really kind of a nightmare. But modern tools make it much better to and easier to do that merge. And then the code base merges together, and now the latest bugs, features, and all the updates to libraries and web servers and application servers are merged together in the current release.
Yeah. Not only does that sound optimistic, that just sounds idealistic. I don't know many organizations that function at that level of just having enough personnel to focus on all that.
Jeff, I agree, and I think that and I said it earlier in our webcast today too, was it boils down to the resources you have for development and how you prioritize them. DevOps doesn't take away, and even building a DevOps and CI/CD pipeline takes development time, and at some point, at least one or more of your developers has to take a timeout, or even a portion of one developer says, I'm going to spend the morning doing this, the afternoon doing that. Like, at some point, you're not fixing bugs or implementing new features in some capacity on your development team to either address a security vulnerability by upgrading a library or building a DevOps and CI/CD pipeline from the technology standpoint, let alone the process implications of that.
In anyone's experience, and again, I'm willing to be proven wrong or told that I'm blowing smoke, but PCI requires patching of critical security patches, installation of critical security patches within 30 days of release.
PCI.
What you describe, we're already acknowledging that it sometimes often doesn't exist in organizations, but if it does exist, is it structured? Is it capable of meeting this 30-day objective? Is the 30-day objective even still reasonable?
So there are really good use cases of companies that I think are doing a really good job at this. Netflix and Etsy and others that have been, they're more advanced, way advanced.
I think as you get more advanced, Matt, I don't know if this is where you're going, that 30 days becomes more reasonable.
Way reasonable.
The more you implement it, the less technical debt you have, the less time it should take you to fix something.
So
but that's like the 1%. The rest of the world operates with very small teams. They're pulled in 1,000 directions. The priorities are keeping everything up and running and keeping everything operational. While I agree in everything we're saying, what should be done, there's very little that compels all these organizations to actually do any of this.
I disagree with. I think that there is not just security benefits to building out this infrastructure for your software development or for your IT infrastructure, in that it doesn't just give you the ability to fix security bugs more quickly. It gives you the ability to implement features more quickly and fix bugs more quickly, in addition to addressing security issues more quickly. The business driver, if I were sitting in with a board or an executive team meeting with my CEO or a CEO of a large corporation, I'd say, look, the first benefit is our development team can push features out more quickly. We can more quickly get to. Now, we have to maybe take a timeout for a little while. Maybe it's a couple weeks, 30 days, 2 months, or whatever.
It's priority number 3 on your list.
After that, we will be able to implement features 30% in 30% less time than before. And that's when the board's going to be like, yeah, you know what? Matt goes, take your time out. Go do that one thing. Maybe you break it up into phases too. I think we're talking about this in kind of like binary terms. You break it up into phases. Like, take a time out in 2 weeks. Do this piece, then go spend 2 weeks doing bugs and features, then take another time out, do this other piece, and eventually you get to the point where when management comes to you and says, we want to support this whole new functionality, and you're like, great, I can do that almost half the time we could before because, we spent some of our development resources, doing the whole...
So we've come full circle. You say implement it in phases. I agree with that, but that also sounds a whole lot like a software development life cycle.
Sure.
Which again, I go back to most DevOps people that I've talked to are not familiar with that concept.
Yeah. No, but it is a life cycle, and I think it's more of a utopian vision if you're looking just at a binary thing. It definitely is happening in phases. That's why we don't see a lot of organizations claiming we've reached utopia and we've got all these pieces in place, right? Because it's applications are largely broken up. And I think we sometimes think of them as we have an application, right? No, applications have multiple pieces. You've got maybe the storage piece here, you've got the app server here, you've got code that runs locally, you've got code that runs in this service, some of the code's up in serverless, and so it's a huge matrix anytime you look at an application today. Maybe 15, 20 years ago, it was more of the apps running on this server and there's a firewall in front of it, and it was a lot more kind of linear and in one piece. But now the ability to spread that technology out is at our fingertips, and we're in different phases and different aspects
and
of our
spreading your
applications.
development teams out across all these different aspects. One of the things we used to do at RSA, we had a continuing engineering team. Their job was to, their they were all bug fixes, right? They were patching issues, they were fixing bugs, and they were a separate stream outside of the development for new features.
Right. And typically your UI team is separate from the database team, which is separate from the application and backend team. And even in our small organization, there's contractors we use for WordPress work that are working in conjunction with myself and other developers that are working on our internal back office application, and those are tied together. And at certain points, we kind of like merge functionality and move on to the next stage. So yeah, it's not a this is our code and it's going to get updated kind of thing.
And there's no easy way to depict this in a picture for most.
You need like a three-dimensional graph or something.
Wizard chess.
Yeah.
So a question.
Yes.
When did we move from Security Weekly to DevOps Security Weekly?
That's called Application Security Weekly.
Application Security Weekly. Yeah,
that's on Mondays.
Okay. Well, it sounded like it was today, but I was just checking.
I was really just, and I have to run soon. So
and by the way, I never got to my point, but we're so far past it now that it doesn't bother.
Do you guys want to?
I want to hear Larry's point.
It's too late. We're too far past it now. We're way too far past it.
Sorry.
How much do you guys want to go longer? I mean, because I got to duck out.
I want to go
smart home and we can leave.
Yes.
Okay. Let's do it.
Smart home and leave.
Smart home and leave. Oh, was that my story?
I think it was your story.
It was my story.
No, it was not. I was going to say it wasn't my story. It was a scene right from Mr. Robot.
Hacker takes over a couple smart home, pumps music, vulgar music. They didn't say what the music was, and plays with the temperature. This could happen to you.
Yeah, but
no,
how
it could happen to Paul. It can't happen to me because I don't interconnect all my stuff.
And I'll tell you what, it can. What I've learned, and I was talking to Jesse from Compass. He's an instructor at NAIT, cybersecurity coach. He did a talk on IoT. And I was talking to him after his talk, and I said, one of the things you hit on was something that I've realized I've been upgrading the smart IoT technology in my home. And when I realized, and from covering previous stories as well, and what Jesse showed, is basically if you're on the same network as these smart home devices, there is no authentication. And I've noticed, we've covered stories where the Philips Hue light bulbs, and I noticed this when I got a new Philips Hue hub, and I had to reassociate all my light bulbs. All I need is the serial number, and I can take over control of that light bulb. Like, how much you want to bet that serial number is broadcast in some kind of wireless technology that I can sniff? And if that's all I need to take it over, like I'm punching it in on the app, I'm like, it's just accessing the API that's on that bulb.
And then you send that API request to Burp Intruder.
Yeah, exactly. And then the other thing was my oldest son connected to my Sonos and was making changes because a lot of these technologies, Sonos and Philips Hue and others, assume that if you're on the same network, and the manufacturers will tell you, no, we're not going to fix this bug because we assume that you have a secure Wi-Fi network. Okay, but what happens when I drop malware on your Android device or whatever it is on your internal network, and I take over your entire smart home? And I think that's exactly...
If
like,
you drop
when
malware on your Android device?
Yeah.
You mean
like
when?
When a device on your network gets malware, that means I can go control your smart home. So one, I think, piece of advice, Jeff, that I have without really, talking about the details of this story, just based on speculation, is you need to, and businesses need to do this as well, this is one place where network segmentation and wireless segmentation, wireless network and Ethernet network segmentation is a really good measure, right?
But think of the consumer. How many people know how to segment their wireless networks in their home?
And it's a huge pain in the ass. Let's say, like my network right now is a flat wireless network at home. Now I got to go to every single one of my smart devices and start flipping its Wi-Fi connection, which is depending on the device, can be a huge pain in the ass. I have to reassociate because a lot of those you connect over, Larry, Bluetooth Low Energy. Correct me if I'm wrong. To get the initial connection, and you tell the device, here's my Wi-Fi network and here's its password, and it goes off to the device. So now I've basically got to reset the networking for every single smart device in my home, which takes time.
We all know how to do that, but the
now put that on the regular user
is just going to put up a Wi-Fi,
and
they're going to
works.
broadcast the SSID, they may or may not put a password on it, and next thing you know, they're associating everything to it. They don't know how to segment their home networks.
Right.
Oh,
but the kicker is if you want to control those devices, now your device that you control them
now has
also
to connect
has
to
be
that
on
other
that network.
Right.
And so if someone compromises my Android phone and I'm at home, now they have access to my smart home. So it's not a great solution. I really want to look into my latest thought on this, and it was just a very fleeting thought, was I need some sort of API gateway that the devices can't talk to another device. They have to talk through the gateway, and I can somehow control access. Or even better, the device manufacturers are able to build authentication into all these APIs, but the technology is so ubiquitous and so different that doing that is not feasible.
The best line in this whole article is, "My heart was racing," Samantha told Fox 6 News. I felt so violated at this point.
Well, yeah.
That was for Sam.
We're right back to porn.
We're
so violated.
And right back to Mr. Robot, which has that. I mean, Jesse showed that scene yesterday at the conference where they take over the smart home, and it's very much a reality. I mean, Jesse showed that a Google Home device will accept a command unauthenticated over the API to reset the device to factory defaults.
Done.
Game over, man.
Yep.
And all it is just a JSON request. I mean, I was looking at it was just JSON request. It was just like, yeah, okay, I'll reset. Oh, some of them you need the system ID or the system name. Well, guess what? You can send an unauthenticated request to the device, and they'll spit you back its system name or system ID, and then you spit back the request, the post request that changes and they all work in a very similar manner. He also had an IRC server that was on a robotic vacuum. What? It was running an IRC. I don't know why. He's still reaching. We'll bring him on the show, talk about some of the stuff. Yeah, it's really cool.
Yeah, that'd be fun.
So, Jeff, that was your story, but we talked about it.
No, I don't have all that smart stuff in my home. I'm an old curmudgeon type person.
You and me both, baby. I don't connect stuff.
How do you turn your lights on and off and set the temperature?
It's called a light switch.
Right.
Thermostat, light switch, wall
There's a
switch.
on your thermostat, there's like a schedule, right?
Yeah.
Like, here's when I'm home, here's when I'm not home, here's what the... I just program it and I let it run.
I know.
Wait, you can program it? Because when I grew up,
but
you had that little knob that, like, when you were home, you went in and you walked over and you turned it up.
But all the new ones, the Honeywells and all these other ones, you can set a schedule, you're done.
Yeah, but you got to get up from your... Anyway.
Come on, Paul. You still remember when you were the remote for your grandfather?
Yes, I do.
And that's the thing, Paul. I mean, you always have to get up because the beer is all the way over there in the refrigerator.
Right.
So
right. Until you come up with a robot that's running IRC to go over and grab you a beer and bring it to you and pop it open, you got to get your butt off.
Related.
I call those kids.
There is a $2.5 million battle robot because the company went bankrupt on sale at eBay right now for $70,000.
That's a steal.
That's right.
Ooh, we should buy two.
Well, there's only one.
All right,
There's only one left.
Closing thoughts?
Closing thought. Many years ago, I think I might have actually still been working for the DOD. So 20-some years ago, I came home from work one day, and my son greets me at the door and says, "Dad, the TV's broken." So I was like, "Oh, that's terrible." I walked over to the TV and I pushed the on button. I pushed the up channel, down channel button, the volume button. It's like, everything seems to be working fine, son. He picked up the remote and started pointing at it and clicking. He's like, "No, Dad, it's broken." And that's where I proceeded to tell him the story of, when I was a kid, if you wanted to get a station, you had to spin a dial and get it just right to get the frequency. And there was this external box that you would spin the dial. And if you were good at it, you could spin it and run outside far enough away from the house in time to see the antenna actually move.
The rotator.
I had one of those
Yep.
when I was little.
Yep.
We
And,
used to climb it as a kid.
my grandparents had a TV that had one of the first remote controls, and it was done
It was
via
wired.
No, it was done via microwave.
Ooh.
Literally
I think-
microwave. It was crazy.
I think the first one we had was like a 6-foot cable to it. So I don't know.
that was our VCR. It had a
How many
30-foot
people
cable.
watch? Yeah, I
Yeah,
don't know
30
how many
foot
people watch TV 6 feet away, but whatever. Anyway.
Nope. 'cause
Anyway.
Anyway, that will conclude
That's
the
good.
show.
Yeah.
So
That's
thank
a
you.
wrap.
That's a wrap. Thanks everyone for listening and watching. Larry, take us out.
Over and out of here.
NetSparker, the developers of desktop and cloud-based web application security scanners that enable you to automatically identify vulnerabilities in your web applications and web services. NetSparker scanners employ a unique and dead-accurate vulnerability scanning engine that automatically verifies vulnerabilities with their proof of concept. For more information, visit them on the web at netsparker.com or email at contact@netsparker.com. Endgame's converged endpoint security platform is transforming security programs. Their people, processes, and technology with the most powerful endpoint protection and simplest user experience, ensuring analysts of any skill level can stop targeted attacks before information theft. Endgame unifies prevention, detection, and threat hunting to stop known and unknown attacker behaviors at scale with a single agent. For more information, visit endgame.com. Recorded Future. They help security teams make more confident decisions faster. Recorded Future's technology automates broad collection and analysis of cyber threat data and delivers the rich external context you need to understand alerts and emerging threats. With real-time threat intelligence from Recorded Future, security teams respond to threats 63% faster and find undetected threats 10 times quicker. To get started, go to recordedfuture.com/Security Weekly and sign up for the Recorded Future Cyber Data. Every day, you'll receive an email with the top results for trending technical indicators, cyber news, exploited vulnerabilities, suspicious IP addresses, and more. Subscribe today and stay ahead of cyber attacks.
Welcome to Security Weekly. I am your host, Matt Alderman. We are recording live at DEFCON 27. We're here at the Social Engineer Village. Joining me for this interview segment is Billy Boatwright. Welcome, Billy.
Thank you.
Now, you did a talk yesterday on imposter syndrome, which we're going to talk about a little bit as well. Give us a little background, though, because you have you have a unique point of view. So I want people to kind of hear. Yeah.
I started as my adult life as a bartender on the Las Vegas Strip for about a decade. I took Chris's social engineering class at Black Hat 7 years ago and realized, oh, that's what I've been doing all my time bartending. And as the years went on and I wanted to transition out of bartending, I went, maybe I could be a social engineer.
Wow.
I already had that skill set.
Right.
I just had to pick up some more technical things along the way.
And so from bartender to social engineer, just like that.
It's a pretty seamless transition because of the skill set a bartender has. I just didn't know the labels. I I didn't know I was building rapport. I was just trying to get a $10 tip.
Right. Now you can use that skill to maybe do a whole lot more.
Exactly.
It's way more, potentially worth way more than $10.
Exactly. But all the rapport building, all the being able to talk to the guy that only has money for a beer to the guy that's paying with his American Express Black Card,
Right.
I had the skills to be able to talk to all of them.
That's really interesting. So let's talk about your talk yesterday on imposter syndrome. What's the thesis behind the talk?
The thesis behind the talk was I discovered a Babe Ruth quote when I was 10 years old. If you're good enough to have a bat in your hands, you're good enough to swing it. My first year of baseball, I was too afraid to swing at a pitch. I watched every pitch go by. I either walked or I struck out. That's it. I got a baseball card with that quote. Next year improved. I've used that quote in every single thing I've ever done when it's come to performance. Basically, if someone thinks I'm good enough to put me into a spot to perform, I might as well perform. No doubts, just perform. So whether it was auditioning for bartending jobs or giving a talk on the SE Village stage, I submitted the CFP. They selected me. Why doubt myself? They think I'm good enough, so give my talk.
Right. But some people do have a problem with actually doing that. They're either nervous or scared that they can't do it. And so any tips that you brought out in your talk yesterday to the audience for people that are like that?
One of the big ones is to avoid hero worship. When I was a kid, I wanted to be a baseball player. But I didn't just want to be a baseball player. I wanted to be Ken Griffey Jr. But I didn't worship him. I wanted to emulate him. So when I joke around and say, when I grow up, I want to be Chris Hadnagy, I want to emulate his SE skills.
Right.
Not because I don't know his personal life, so I don't want to worship him. So to avoid hero worship, another big one is to get involved. Whether it's volunteering at a B-Sides or signing up for a competition. The competition one's a big one because the mutual suffering of, say, the SECTF or signing up for a class where you have to, have hard homework or something. You'll build a bond with people. And then when you go to your next DEFCON, you've got 10 friends. And then they introduce you to 3 people.
Right.
Now you've got 30 friends.
Right.
And then you're just walking down the hallways 5 years later going, well, that was easy.
Yeah.
Or volunteered at a B-Sides. There's 1 million of those now.
Yeah. All over, including the ones this week. We stay at the Tuscany Suites. We stay with the crew over there.
I've been on staff there for 7 years because I'm local to Las Vegas.
Right. Yeah, and they're all over the world at different times of the year. As you think about what you did yesterday, I'm curious whether. How do you feel now that you've done it, right? And you've kind of made this progression. This is your first time on a podcast, too.
Yes, it is.
Right? So I said, take it easy on you. What do you feel right now? How do you feel? You feel...
I feel good.
Yeah.
That was my 3rd SE Village talk yesterday. And I felt nervous the first 2.
Yeah.
But not like I didn't belong, just your standard nerves.
Right.
Like I don't equate nervousness with imposter syndrome. We get nervous for all sorts of stuff.
Right.
Yesterday's felt really good.
Good.
Because it was very personal to me, and it was. I wanted people to be able to take away something, and make their lives better immediately.
Yeah, and you probably did that.
I had a couple messages on Twitter that expressed as much.
Good. How you feel right now?
Good.
Awesome. Billy, thank you for joining us.
Of course.
My pleasure. And with that, we'll take a short break. Thanks for watching. Welcome to Security Weekly. I'm your host, Matt Alderman. We are recording at DEFCON 27. We're here at the Social Engineering Village. Joining me for this interview is Edward Miro. Edward, welcome.
Hey, how you doing today?
Great. So you did an interesting talk a couple days ago. We're going to talk about the social engineering aspects of rideshare.
Right.
So give us a little primer for why the talk.
Okay. So I've worked in IT for about 20 years. I took a little bit of time off from that to work as a federal contractor. And as I transitioned back into the IT world, I did like most people and just decided to drive for a rideshare company just to make ends meet, make a few extra bucks. And as a hacker and a security aware person, I noticed really early on that passengers were sharing sensitive and private information with me. So it caused me to think, what could you possibly do with this if you were a bad person? So it led to me writing this speech that I did on Thursday, and it's kind of like a twofold thing. One is, if you're interested in social engineering, you really have to be good with socializing with human beings. A lot of the books and the content that are out there, they're great, they're amazing, but they're not going to give you, it's not a magic bullet. If you're not comfortable talking to people, then
social engineering is not for you.
No, probably not. So how do you get a lot of social interactions quick, and how do you hone these skills and practice the things that you're learning? I found that rideshare was really good because you get these short interactions with multiple people, different backgrounds, different cultures. If you try something or you're rusty when it comes to socializing, you can wait till the next guy. It's a lot of fun. And also, if I decided to think about if you were a bad person or a hacker or someone who wanted to take advantage of the fact that in these kind of close personal interactions that you're having with people where passengers feel comfortable and they're starting to share things like criminal histories, medical histories, things that could be used against them, how could you use ride sharing to do that?
So I never thought about aspects of this, but I did this week primarily because my daughter was here at Black Hat, and she was here at DEF CON yesterday, and she lives up in Fort Collins in Colorado, and I said, well, just grab an Uber and come to the airport.
Right.
And I thought about it for a second. I'm like, wait a minute. I'm putting my 19-year-old daughter in an Uber. I don't know the car she's going to get in, okay, and has to get to the airport. And I started thinking about that for a second. I went, was that the right thing to do? Because you've heard some of the stories, right?
Oh, for sure.
But then when we started talking about your topic, I was like, oh, yeah, you're talking to those people. Let's say you decide to tell them, yeah, every Sunday I go to the airport because I fly for work. He knows where you live because he just picked you up, or she, and they know every Sunday you're leaving. Does that now make your house a target for burglary because the Uber driver knows that every Sunday you're gone?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, and when you come home, right? You come home, they drop you off. It's late at night. What, they're just, I never really thought about some of the security aspects of that. But this week I did, just because of my daughter. Same thing. She went home on Uber last night. I'm like text daddy when you get home, so I know you got home safe.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and if you employ basic socialization skills like the Dale Carnegie stuff, how to win friends and influence people, talk about their interests, use their name, keep redirecting the conversation back to them, be interested in the other person, they kind of start to feel like they can open up. And I did speak to a psychology professor about this topic, and he says that people, they yearn for an ability to be vulnerable and to open up and to express themselves. And if you put them in a situation where they're comfortable and you're talking about them, you're talking in terms of what they care about. I mean, if you saw any of the other the talks that were by the other speakers, social engineering always comes back to making it about the other person and not about yourself. Because what's everyone's favorite topic? Themselves.
Right.
So then I thought, well, what if you wanted to use this against a particular company? So ride sharing uses location-based matching. So if I parked outside of your business or your house, if I wanted to target an individual and you request a ride, if I'm the closest driver to you, there's like a 99% chance we're going to get picked up.
Right.
So let's say I want to attack your company. I want to gather OSINTs and I want to gather intel. I can just park near your business and I'm going to get your people all day. And why would you be afraid to talk to a rideshare driver about what software you use, some of the gossip at work? It couldn't hurt, right? It's just this random guy. It's an anonymous, paid, trusted interaction And I don't think people are applying the same type of security awareness that people like us are thinking about on a daily basis.
Right.
I just think,
and it can be a very targeted attack because it's not a person, it's multiple people from the company. So now you're triangulating all this data you're collecting from all these employees over a period of time and building up this kind of portfolio of stuff that you can now use potentially against the company. I never thought that's just an interesting way to think about it.
Yeah, I would pick up passengers and I'd see, in the town I live in, Chico, California, there's probably half a dozen really big tech companies there, so you get really good at picking them out based on the address, and tech people are really good about using rideshare. Like some of them use it every morning and every evening, and it's like, oh, you work for XYZ company. Cool, do you know so-and-so? And, it's easy to drop names. I'm a tech person in my town, so I probably know someone at one point was at any of these companies. I know their lingo. I'm interested in technology. I can talk the talk. I can talk about programming and just keep redirecting back into their interests. And it's just a natural human thing to want to share more. And I'm just this random Uber driver. I mean, what could I possibly do?
Right, exactly. Any recommendations that you did as part of your talk that the listener should hear from you?
I think I have two recommendations, and they're both targeted towards two specific audiences. If you're a security professional or someone looking to get into information security or social engineering specifically, you need to practice socializing. You need to get good at talking to human beings. Ride sharing is a great way to do that. I consider it a really good laboratory. You can try different techniques. You can try pretexts. You can see what people ask you. And it's a good way to do that. And as far as being a rider, I think it's great that people are amenable to small talk. And the current meta is that people are sick and tired of rideshare drivers that talk too much. In the tech world, we're a little introverted. We want to be left alone. And there is a little bit of that. But as a driver, I assume that most people were going to be like that, like me. But that's not true. Most passengers, even the ones that aren't very talkative, they want a little bit of small talk. So it's easy to engage them in that conversation. So I just think, it's good to be social. It's good to have small talk, but we should probably have a line.
Just watch what you say.
Yeah, especially if you're a person who is a potential target, if you're a high-value person. And as a rideshare driver, I would get people from facility staff all the way up to executives. And executives love to talk, and they love to brag about the things that they have and the companies that they own and run. And, they just assume I'm just this random anonymous person.
Which you are to them, but may not be in reality.
I can't imagine there aren't people in the world using this exact attack vector in this way. I mean, it's just too easy. I mean, even just being aware of its potential, you don't even have to target a specific person or a company. Just being aware of using social engineering in that situation, people will start sharing things that could be used against them. It's kind of scary.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, definitely. Edward, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate this.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks for watching. We'll see you soon. Welcome to Security Weekly. I'm your host, Matt Alderman. We are here at DEFCON 27, recording live from the Social Engineer Village. Joining me for this interview is Jason Street.
How's it going?
Good. How are you?
Pretty
How you
good.
feeling? I heard you had a little buzz.
Yeah, I had a run-in with a bacon cheeseburger that won. So
got it.
And it won thoroughly. So I'm just trying to deal with that.
Right. So for anybody that's out there, no pickup hugs today. Just
just a little low impact hugs.
Got it. Okay. I want to talk badges for a second.
Okay.
It's interesting, right? A lot of people who were coming up to me, I took mine off for this shoot. But mine's purple.
Right.
I think it's because I'm a vendor,
right?
And so you've got a lot of people with the white ones walking around, wanting to get the purple. That's a blue/greenish one.
Yeah, that's the blue speaker badge.
Okay.
The purple vendor, the red goon. And then this is like one of the special magic token ones that Joe Grant gave me. So.
Got it. And obviously you have to connect with a number of people, and it moves you through different levels. Right. Is there a rhyme or reason behind any of that?
I think one of the biggest goals of it is for interaction.
Right.
It's like, one of the key things at DEFCON is people see a sea of people, and they don't see a sea of possible connections of people that have the same interest that they're interested in. I mean, that's what it's about. We all want to stay in our shells, and how do you draw people out that way? So there's always been throughout. I've been coming to DEFCON for 15 years, and it's like, and quite a lot of them, especially recent in the last 5 years or so, the theme has been connecting with
Mm-hmm.
others. It's like trying to communicate. They've done it through puzzles where you need to like actually look at other
Right.
people's badges
Yep.
for puzzles. It's like, and then electronically you have to transfer data. So I think that's one of the key things is the community is a connection of people that you may not be, outside your bubble of comfortableness. It's like where you can go and reach and talk to them. And while you're bumping badges, it's like actually say hello.
Hey,
Actually say, what are you doing here in the wireless village? Why are
Yeah.
you doing in the hardware hacking village or the social engineering village? Why are you here? It's like, what are you hoping to learn? And that's what they're trying to spark.
Yeah, and I think you're right, especially as we think about the new generation of people coming into the security industry, right? Like my daughter, they do a lot on their phones,
Right.
but they don't do the human interaction
Exactly,
sometimes,
yeah.
right? So if you go walk the hallways, I was over at Flamingo yesterday. We did a couple interviews over at Blue Team Village. Oh, a lot of people sitting in the hall, but they're not interacting. They're kind of on their phones, right? So the badges is a way for hopefully people to connect. Let's tie that into social engineering a bit, because if we think about that interaction actually can help us improve some of our social engineering skills as well, instead of just always relying on our technology.
Right. Yeah, I tell people it's like I got into social engineering so I wouldn't have to be technical for a living. It's like it's about hacking the human. It's about just walking in and using social interaction, looking at social cues to actually be successful in what you're trying to compromise.
So as a red teamer, you don't have to worry about all the pen testing tools. You're honing your people skills and using those to actually do some very interesting things.
Yeah, I don't class myself as a red teamer. It's like I'm like a one-off because red teamers, they have all kinds of tools. They have lockpicks. They have all these other.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that's all fine and good. It's like, but I come in and I literally YOLO it. It's like I'm there. I tell my clients I give them only 2 hours of recon. It's like I won't do more than 2 hours, and I start with Google. I don't use Montego. I don't use like all these other really cool OSINT tools. Some of them that I teach at Black Hat, I don't use those. And when I come in, it's like I'm usually using a fake badge and a uniform, and have like a rubber ducky, or I have like a bash bunny, or one of the really cool Hack 5 tools to go out and actually attack. Because I want them to understand, red teamers, like when you get that report, you're like, oh, look how elite they did. Look how ninja skills they had. We don't have to worry about that because we're not going to usually face those kind of people.
Right.
And I want them to say, but are you prepared for the guy who just walked off the street and in 2 minutes and 22 seconds had full control over your bank, which I've done before.
Wow.
And I was wearing a leather DEFCON jacket and red Thundercat tennis shoes at the time. And I had full control, and the video camera timestamp was from when I walked in to having full control was 2 minutes and 22 seconds.
Wow.
That wasn't skill. That was just acting like I'm supposed to be there.
Right, exactly. And I think that's really interesting for people to understand. We put so much emphasis into the penetration tests and making sure our systems are hardened, but then somebody like you walks in and in 2 minutes has control of a facility.
Exactly.
And there wasn't a single tool in what you did outside of Google, which everybody has access to.
And it's all about, and that's why I call myself not a red teamer. I do security awareness engagements. It's like, because I'm trying to train the human. Once I finish compromising place, I'll leave for 2 minutes, and then I come back and I talk to every single person that I compromised, and I explain to them right then and there, this is what happened. I was a bad guy. You didn't feel confident to question me.
Right.
And
To
this is what
challenge me.
happened.
Yeah.
And so it's about empowering your employees. It's about educating your employees and then enforcing the policies that you've already put in place. If you can do those 3 E's, it's like you're going to have a much better workforce and a more secure environment. But we're not empowering our employees to actually do any critical thinking, do any thinking about what's going on around them. It's like they're not stupid. They know what they're doing. When you say stupid clicker, stupid user clicked on a link, stupid user went to a website, that's stupid information security that didn't properly train their users. It's like they will do what's necessary for them to keep their jobs.
Yeah.
If you're not telling them that security is part of it, don't blame them.
Yeah, they're not going to do it.
Right.
And we are curious as humans to click on the link or check things out. And sometimes we don't think necessarily that it potentially is malicious, even though in a lot of cases it is, but it comes down to training.
Right.
And are you seeing improvements in training from a security awareness perspective? Paul and I have talked about this on a few shows. Are we getting better at training our employees and giving them that sense of awareness? Now, we know at the executive level, in some cases, with the press in the coverage we've seen with breaches and stuff. At the higher levels, I think the answer is yes. Do you see it improving below that level?
I think slowly but surely it is. I mean, one of the classes I teach is a teach-to-teacher kind of class, how to create a security awareness program within your organization, where IT security administrators and IT people and security professionals come in to learn how to create a security awareness program internally. And by the way we're getting people in, it seems to be effective. It's like they're actually actively looking at that. It's like, it's not sexy. It's not about like hacking all this stuff, but they're like, this is required. This is something that's necessary. And so their companies are investing money to have them come and learn those things. So I think it's getting better, but it just like when back in the 90s, it's like, when everything was just wide open, it was really bad until Microsoft started saying, hey, we're going to take security more seriously.
Right.
And then there was that gap that you had to fill. It's like, so we've got a gap that we've got to fill. It's been there that way the whole time.
It's been there since day one.
I mean, it's older than MSO 867, which is still effective, and that's old.
Yeah.
So we have to just do that. We have to make it where we're filling that gap up quickly.
Now, if I'm an organization and I haven't made investments from a security awareness and training for my employees, where should they start? Can you provide some recommendations on where should they go? What should they look at? Who should they talk to?
Yeah. The first thing they need to do is new hire training. They need to look at who their new hires are. It's like, and start incorporating security, a security class, a security section in that new hire training.
Got it.
Let them know right off the bat, this is how it's supposed to be done. Embolden them to talk to their other coworkers who have been here and may not have realized that was it. So those are your agents of change. It's like, those are your advocates for security.
So by training the new hires, they actually help cross-train existing employees.
Exactly.
Because you're infusing the importance of security in the new hire training. You're hoping that they're going to infuse that to the rest of the employee base.
Right. When they walk by and they see a user who has a password on their monitor, they'll say, hey, I learned that in security. It's like, in security class, you weren't supposed to do that.
Got it.
So they'll be those advocates for you.
Oh, that's great. Any other resources for people to take a look at that might be interesting for people to kind of research on their own?
I think, it's not even a plug, but it sounds like it, but the social-engineering.org website, Chris Hagnagis has a lot of good books on it as well. There's a lot of resources out there if you could look. And then I do security awareness training individually to companies as well.
That's great. Jason, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks for watching. We'll be back soon.
The biggest problem in security that remains unsolved is unprotected attack paths that allow threats to compromise vulnerable targets in the cloud and data center. But traditional microsegmentation is too complex and time-consuming. There's a better approach. Edgewise Zero Trust Auto Segmentation. Edgewise is impossibly simple microsegmentation, delivering results immediately with a security outcome that's provable and management that's zero touch. Driven by machine learning, Edgewise automatically builds policies that protect any application in any cloud without any changes to your network. They provide measurable improvement by quantifying attack path risk reduction and verifying software identity before it communicates to stop application compromises and data breaches. To see how to eliminate your network attack surface, visit securityweekly.com/Edgewise. Let the team at Black Hills Information Security test your defenses. With over 10 years of experience in penetration testing, red teaming, and threat hunting, the testers at Black Hills will help you find the holes in your security before the bad guys do. The team at Black Hills cares about educating and sharing their knowledge by creating countless blogs, open source tools, and webcasts for you to learn more about the tradecraft of pen testing and red teaming. Visit securityweekly.com/BHIS to join their mailing list and view the latest blogs and webcasts from Black Hills Information Security. Qualys is introducing a new prescription for security, and it's free. Global IT asset discovery and inventory. Activate it today at securityweekly.com/Qualys so you can achieve 100% near real-time visibility across your hybrid environments.
Welcome to Security Weekly. I'm your host, Matt Alderman. We are recording live at DEFCON 27. We're at the Social Engineer Village. Joining me for this interview is Perry Carpenter. Welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me.
You're going to talk about you in your presentation here in a little bit. And what interests me about this story is I have an autistic child. And you're going to talk a little bit about your autism and kind of your path here a little bit. Give us a little kind of precursor into your talk.
Yeah, so as I was saying before we put the headphones on, this talk is terrifying for some reason right now. I was diagnosed later in life, and all throughout my life before then, I kind of knew that I was different. In one piece of writing that I put out recently, I talked about how I kind of identified kind of like an alien or alien anthropologist, kind of looking at the world around me, trying to figure out why people do the things that they do, believe the things that they believe, act the way that they act, and so on. And so over the past few years, it's come to light as I got my diagnosis that, there's a name for that, and it's called Asperger's syndrome, which has recently been reclassified just as autism spectrum disorder.
Right.
And it's answered a lot of questions, but it also opens up a lot of new things that you have to think about. But overall, there have been a number of things over my life that whether intentionally or unintentionally, I've learned how to use social engineering skills and other skills in order to achieve a modicum of success. So now I'm a C-level executive at KnowBe4, and we focus on human behavior. So you can kind of see one of those things that people on the spectrum are well known for is this idea of a restricted interest. So for me, my restricted interest was human behavior, and it linked to security. And early in life, I was into magic and misdirection, and later in life, I got into street hypnosis and pickpocketing and simulated mind reading, and it was it's all pivoting around why people behave the way that they do. So I just talk about how over a period of years, I learned how to put on different masks. I learned how to present really well in front of groups of people, how I immersed myself into the speaking culture to kind of try to break the monotonous tone that I used to have. I mean, back in high school, and regardless of what you think about people on the spectrum not showing emotion clearly, I did feel a little bit of pain when somebody referred to me as Mr. Robot, or somebody said, Perry is an emotional robot. And I look back, and at that period of my life, I can definitely see how I always gave that impression. But later in life, probably when I was 30 or so, I got put in some situations where I was having to lead teams, present very frequently, and so on. And so I went and modeled myself after some of the speakers that I admired.
Right, you kind of pick a role model.
Pick a role model.
Or mentor.
And I saw it as picking a mask to put on at the time. Not that I wanted to fake what I was doing, but I wanted to be able to emulate somebody.
Is that because it gave you confidence by mirroring somebody or using that kind of mask? Did it build your confidence level? Is that why?
I think it did. It dissociated me a little bit, so it's not me that's on the stage doing this thing. I'm not revealing so much of myself, but I'm kind of picking the me that I would want to be on stage and projecting that. And so I learned how to do all the, probably hopefully if you're hearing some voice variants and things like that, all of that got injected at that period of time. Another thing that happened, actually two things collided about the same time that really I think worked out well for me. And I'll touch on one thing that happened before that. Because I was working at Walmart at the time in their security department. When you get elevated to a certain position, they want you to go through the Dale Carnegie training course.
Okay. Yep.
And in that, there's a lot of public speaking, whether you like it or not, and a lot of trying to figure things out. And so at the end of that course, I got the award for the most changed in any student that was there. And so that kind of propelled me. It gave me a little bit more confidence. Later on, I was doing security at a different company, Alltel, before they were bought by Verizon. and I ran their security awareness efforts and anything related to an enterprise security initiative, so transformative in nature. And at that time, I was doing a lot of work trying to also just flesh out ideas. So I started to plug into the blogosphere and do some writing, and then ended up being introduced to some folks at Gartner. So Alltel acquisition happens by Verizon. I ended up going to Gartner, and now I'm in a position where I'm also not just having to be intelligent, but I'm having to articulate that on the phone every day and speak in front of people. And about that same time, also the pastor at the church that I was attending had an issue and had to step down. And I, in my background, had some theological training as well, and so they were facing the decision of, do we close the church that we're in, or do we find somebody that can sub? And so now I am teaching once a week in front of people. I'm also walking through the wreckage of human life with people and seeing their emotions. And then I'm also doing the Gartner thing. And so every day of every week, I'm having to get in front of people and learn how to express ideas in a way that they understand, learn how to deal with the emotion that's coming from them, and learn how to reflect that out in a way that creates change in whichever environment that I'm in.
Yeah, and I think what people need to understand is the spectrum of autism is very broad.
Yeah.
It's very wide-ranging. You're on one side of that spectrum. My son is actually on the opposite side of that spectrum. And so a lot of people stereotype autistic people in not having connections with humans, right? And you've worked through that in what you've done through your career, where we're having this conversation, right?
Yeah.
My son never had that problem, actually. My son is very socially adept. He loves people and he loves talking to people. He has, he's more slow when it comes to learning and learning disabilities, but he doesn't have the social things that a lot of people stereotype autistic people with. So he's never had to fight that. In our life, it's more about what's that right skill set and that thing that motivates him when he graduates high school to move forward. You had some different things that you've been fighting through because you're doing this, right? You're going to get up and talk about your life and your story here in a little bit, and that's kind of nerve-wracking for you.
Yeah.
Hopefully this is helping, by the way.
No, it's helping me kind of straighten out some thoughts verbally, for sure.
Yeah.
And I mentioned this briefly also before, that my son is also on the spectrum, and so he's also very, very social and very he expresses emotions really well, but he's also the same way I was at his age, very rigid in thinking, very hot and cold when it comes to my opinions on other people, and so it's really interesting to see. It seems like in the literature, and if you talk to therapists, there's something that happens at about age 40, where people that are on the spectrum tend to, it's almost like an epiphany moment, but it's not. There's something that happens within their brain, and they naturally are more self-aware and aware of the feelings of others. They have more empathy. They're more coachable in a lot of ways, realize that there's gradients of, I hate to say right and wrong, but I think you understand what I mean.
I know what you mean.
And so I would say to anybody that does have a kid and you're seeing a lot of those things, that if you trace a lot of the people that are socially aware and they're autistic, there are good things that are in store for them later in life, because being intelligent is one thing. Not having emotional intelligence is a completely different thing.
Right.
And so if your son can have a good conversation with somebody, if he can even get the surface level knowledge to start an entry level career, he's got a good path. I kind of went the other way. I was really good at technical things. And I was the guy that when I was coding back at Walmart would unplug all the lights overhead, and I lived in a cave and would never talk to anybody.
Right.
I'd code for 10 hours and it felt like 5 minutes. And I had to be brought into the social
you
world.
had to kind of be brought out of that environment into the social environment.
And it was because I was good at coding. It's like everybody gets promoted to their level of incompetence.
Right.
And I had to decide, well, do I want to go back, or do I want to try to move forward in figure out how far I can take some of the little awakenings that I had early on.
Yeah, and it's difficult.
Yeah.
Because again, there's a lack of comfort there,
Yeah.
right? You're out of your comfort zone, and that will tend to keep people in the environment that they're in and not come out and try the other things.
And I'll be honest. So going in and giving a security presentation in front of thousands of people is easy for me because I can disassociate from that. It's not individuals. Talking one-on-one or 1 to 3 or a small group of people, that's excruciating. And I did a lot of both of those at Gartner and in my role now. And I go in and I can become the person that I want to be.
Right.
But at the end of that day or that couple days, if it's a conference, then I just have to unplug and let everything kind of filter back in and try to recharge a lot.
Exactly. Now, you published a book.
I did.
Transformation Security Awareness. Is this some of your learnings and your life learnings that are in this book?
So one of the things I'm going to talk about is this idea of restricted interests and connected domains within that. And so a lot of the connected domains come in that.
Got it.
And so I talk about how we use this term security awareness, and I think it's a misnomer. And so I draw a few things out of that is just because somebody's aware doesn't mean they care. If we try to work against human nature, we'll fail every single time. And what our employees do is way more important than what they know, because knowledge doesn't stop a breach, but action decision does.
Yes.
And so if you could see in that, there's a lot of human behavior aspects. There's also a lot of, I get into design and marketing principles and how we change people's opinions on things. I get into the fog model of behavior and how everything relates to motivation and ability and prompting. And I get into social constructs and how we can use social pressure. Even right now, I'm hearing myself, I'm so much more comfortable talking about this than the other. But how we can use all of that and how we can create programs that actually drive the behavior that we want rather than just throwing information at people and hoping for the best.
Right. Oh, that's great. Perry, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for watching. We'll be back soon. Welcome to Security Weekly. I'm your host, Matt Alderman. We are recording live at DEFCON 27. We're in the Social Engineer Village, and for this interview, we have Chris Pritchard. Welcome.
Hi, how you doing?
Good. So you want to talk social engineering basics,
Sure.
which is great. And then the tagline was also known as breaking into airports, casinos, and critical infrastructure. Yep. So hopefully we get some interesting stories to share. Let's start with the basics.
Okay.
What are some of the basics when it comes to social engineering?
So the whole reason behind the talk was that I was worried that people were thinking to get into social engineering that they needed to know body language, facial expressions.
Right.
And I thought that was a bit of a barrier. And actually, you don't need to know those things to make a start. So the whole talk was about simple, basic things that you can do to make a start in social engineering.
So what are some of those basics?
So some of those basics are going to a property. Let's say that this building was the target. Go to that building, have a look around, walk around the perimeter, look for weak spots. And if you're going to try and get in and pretend to be one of the employees, what do the employees look like? Or how do they dress?
Right.
Do they have ID badges on?
Right.
What do they look like?
Yeah.
Copy that, emulate it, because then if you do get in or manage to sort of tailgate in, or you find a smoking shed and sort of follow somebody in through that way, or a back door, when you're actually in the building, you then look like that person or the people who work in there.
Yeah, so you want to blend in
Absolutely.
with the people.
Yep.
Confidence has to be in one of those basics too, right? Because there has to be a level of confidence that you are really trying to be an employee or whatever. I mean, there has to be a confidence in the way you carry yourself and your demeanor if you get in.
Yeah, there's a little bit of that. But if you don't have that confidence, again, don't use that as a barrier. Use that as a tool and say, okay, so I'm going to be nervous because nerves are natural. So I'm going to be nervous when I get into this, high security place where I'm not supposed to be. How can I make my nerves as part of the story? And go, I know, I can pretend to be a new employee. I've lost my ID badge, or I've lost where the toilets are, where the coffee and tea making facilities are. Use that and go up to someone genuinely nervous and go, I'm really sorry, this is my first day, and I forgot the bit where the toilets are. Can you show me where that is, please, or point it out?
Right.
So use it. Don't let that stop you. Use that as a tool.
Got it. Some of the other basics.
Some of the other basics. Okay, so the crucial ones I think are ID badges. Now, we're wearing DEFCON badges today.
Right. Well, you are. I take mine off for the podcast.
Yeah,
mine's over there. My wife has already social engineered that, by the way, twice in the last 2 days. Well, she didn't have a badge. Yep. We were with our daughter yesterday.
Did she get challenged?
She did,
okay,
by one of the goons. And she said, look, I'm her mother. She's here. I'm a vendor. We're just going to the booth. I'm not trying to do anything, sly or anything like that. And they're like, okay. And they let her in. She was just confident. She just kind of pushed her way through.
And there's always a good logic behind having a story, a pretext, a logic, a reason why you should be in there. And that's exactly the same with social engineering. Make up a story as to why you should be in there. So one of the things I say is if you're going to think of a story, make that story about things you know about. So I come from an IT network background. My story is often I'm here to fix the internet because nobody wants the internet not to work. So if you go in there and say, I'm going to fix your internet and make it faster for you, people are like, let me help you. Yeah, right. And they'll come your way and want to help you fix that thing.
Right.
So yeah, make it about stuff you know.
So badges,
copy them, make them. It doesn't have to be exact,
but get them close.
Close. I mean, I've broken into an airport with a plain white badge, nothing on it. Now, the airport had lots of information and details on the badge, but one of the other crucial things that you had to be observant about is they had little metal pins stuck up and down the badges that said they were first aiders or something along those lines. And I emulated that. I couldn't make a copy of the badge, so I emulated the metal badges.
So the lanyard and the other things on the lanyard.
Exactly.
Interesting.
And that got me in.
Yeah.
So those are little subtle things that we just need to be observant about when we're trying to get into these places and think about and emulate it as much as possible.
So when you think about breaking into airports, right, badge, what about the casino? How'd you get in there? Was it badge again?
It was badge again. Yeah, it was exactly the same. It was badge again. And what I did is I went into a sort of a lower security area first. And I got challenged by somebody in there. And this particular one, I did lots of casinos, but this particular one was next to something that was a high security facility. And so all of the staff in this particular casino got training by anti-terrorist police. And the guy sort of challenged me and he said, oh, hi, are you lost? And again, use that to your advantage. Yeah, I'm lost. I'm looking for the boardroom or the meeting room. Oh, okay, let me show you. As we were walking down the corridor, we started chatting. And he said, I'm really sorry to have challenged you. I just wanted to make sure you weren't a terrorist or an intruder. And I said, well, that's okay. That's fine. I'm okay with the challenge. I'm not a terrorist. And I wasn't. I was an intruder, but I wasn't a terrorist.
You weren't a terrorist.
Yeah. But what was really great is I used that guy, that contact later, because I saw him in another area and I said, oh, hi, John. I need to get into the security operations center. I hear you're the man to talk to. Oh, hi, Chris. Nice to see you again. Yeah. Let me go and direct you to Bert, and he will help you out. He's the head of physical security. And so because I had that connection, I had an introduction.
You used that
exactly
to your advantage to get to that next level. Is that how you ultimately ended up getting in?
So I got a guided tour of their physical security operations center for the entire facility by the head of physical security. And if you are with somebody of that stature, nobody's going to challenge you because you're with the man who's supposed to be in charge of all that stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Now, I worked 7.5 years in nuclear power.
Okay.
And when you used to go into the plant, you went through the man doors, right? The single trap doors. You went through dropped all your stuff in the X-ray machines, all that other kinds of stuff. So I think it would be very difficult to get into one of those types of facilities.
But did you always go in through the front door?
Well, yes, of course I always went in through the front door.
And so what we often don't think about is the back door or the
side door or...
Exactly.
Yeah, so a maintenance access or something like that. Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and this is something else that I point out when you're doing that sort of walk around the perimeter.
Yeah.
Don't look at the front. The front is going to be probably the most secure thing there because everybody's coming in, everyone's got that channel, they have lots of security guards, they're expecting everyone to go in that way.
Yeah, now that's a great, because one of the things that all the nuclear power plants have is they have a fresh water source. Because they have to bring in the water to cool the plant, right? And that goes off to the cooling tower. But that's always on a lake or something like that. So there's always a back door from that because you could come through the fresh water pipes or whatever kind of come in that back door.
Yeah, absolutely.
Interesting.
And somewhere as difficult as a nuclear power plant, which had some experience with that, I would set that up a bit more complicated. So I would make some phone calls and make it so that they were expecting me. But I would hardly ever go in through the front door unless I have to.
Unless you had to.
Yeah. Back doors are better. They're weaker.
Yes, agreed. Any other tips or tricks that people should think about when they're trying to do these social engineering tests?
So yeah, I would try and talk to people. I would engage. You have to. What we're often worried about is being spotted. And so I would try and think about, how can I engage in polite conversation? You don't have to make somebody your best friend, but you are supposed to work there. Think about that mindset. What would you do as an employee when you go into your normal day job?
Right.
You talk to people.
Yeah.
Or you
give them a hug.
Exactly. Well, yeah, maybe not. Unless you're trying to clone the badge. You've got a badge.
Yeah, and then we could do that. Yeah.
Yep. So yeah, I think about that mindset. Think about, what do I do when I go in my normal 9 to 5? I talk to people. If I hear someone talking about holidays, vacations, I would be, oh, did you go there? I've been thinking about going there. And again, you're just building that acceptance that you should be there. If you are talking to people, if you are not talking to people, there's a slight chance that you're going to get spotted, because they're going to go, who's that new guy? Right. I don't know who he is. But if you talk to people and just polite conversation and interject every now and then, doesn't have to be everything, but yeah, you're going to build acceptance that you're supposed to be there.
What's that normal timeline look like when you're on these activities? Are we talking just a few days where you're doing this, or do they get extended a little longer in some cases?
It varies. It varies on what the client wants, and that's ultimately the challenge. What does the client want us to do?
Yeah.
And often we will have discussions and dialogues about, what do you want? What's the target? Is it a red folder in the finance department, or is it you want us to come in, put a Dropbox in and leave, or do you want us to come in, sit in there as long as possible, try and exfiltrate sort of sensitive paperwork, for example? So some are very quick. Our approach is often, if the customer has never had any social engineering type tests, we'll try and make that quite short, because there's a good chance we'll get in.
The proof point is, can you get in first?
Yeah.
And if you can, in organizations that have never done it before, now they know, okay, so somebody could get in, they start to improve stuff, they start to do awareness training, some other things.
Yeah.
Then they might bring you back in and say, okay, now that we've done that, can you actually put something in the net, in the data center, or pull out some sensitive data or something
exactly
like that.
Yeah. And then you have a longer engagement, and that time frame is extended, because you hope that the social engineering training has worked.
And you hope everybody forgets who the heck you are from the last time.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. Or you wear a disguise, but yeah. So yeah, it really does depend on what the customer's maturity level, I'd say, was like.
That's awesome. Chris, thanks for joining us.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you for watching. We'll be back soon.